In today's video, we will reveal Shin Lim's incredible first audition magic performance on America's Got Talent. Let's do a quick rewind of what happened in the performance. Shin Lim asked the show's host, Tyra Banks, to pick a card from the spread. She chose the Queen of Spades and wrote her name on it with a marker. Then, Shin put the card back in the deck and magically made it appear on top. He then took the Queen of Spades card and circled it around the left side of his chest, blew on it, and it turned entirely blank. But to everyone's surprise, the Queen of Spades got tattooed on his chest. He briefly covered his mouth with both hands, and the card reappeared between his teeth. Shin put the card back in the deck, waved his hand over it, and all the cards turned red except for the signed Queen of Spades. The magician then gives the card to Tyra and asks her to palm it between her hands. He picks the blank card and, with a flick of his wrist, turns it into Queen of Spades, and the card between Tyra's hand turns blank. Shin then places those two cards on the table. He then spreads the deck on the table, creating a big arrow pointing toward the red envelope on the table. Two cards that were placed on the table also turned blank. He then picks up the red envelope and opens it to reveal the same Queen of Spades card with Tyra's name. Shin takes the card, places it back in the deck, and with a sudden movement, turns the whole deck transparent except for the Queen of Spades card. He hands the card to Tyra and instructs her to place it back in the deck. Afterward, he asked her to put her hand above the deck, and smoke began to rise from underneath the deck. Shin asks her to lift her hand, and the entire deck turns into a solid plastic block with the Queen of Spades with Tyra's name sealed inside it. He takes that deck from Tyra, places it in the box, and smashes the box underneath Tyra's hand to vanish the entire deck into thin air. He then tore the card box, marking the end of the performance. Before I get down to the reveal, I want to give a special shout out to my elite patrons who joined the $30 tier this month. Greg Winter, Lindor the Magnificent, and Steve Kirsch. Now I would like to give a shout out to my first class patrons. And last but not least, here is a shout out to my super patrons. Your support is the reason I am able to improve my content and upload more regularly. I will now break down the performance and explain each trick that Shin Lim performed one by one. Shin Lim starts by spreading a pack of cards in front of Tyra and asks her to select any card. She selected the Queen of Spades, apparently by free selection. Shin then requests her to sign her selected card. Notice the deck that Shin spreads on the table was never shown to the audience to prove that all the cards were different. This is because all the cards were the Queen of Spades. The reason for forcing Tyra Banks into selecting the Queen of Spades was because he had a Queen of Spades tattooed on his chest. Shin Lim has had this tattoo even before his first appearance on America's Got Talent. You can find a video on Shin Lim's channel, posted on the October 21st of 2017, in which he did a performance for Jason Derulo. During his performance, he made Jason's selected card, which just so happened to be the Queen of Spades, disappear from the card and appear right on his chest. When we see Shin Lim's first AGT appearance, we find that Shin Lim first appeared on America's Got Talent in 2018. Forcing the Queen of Spades on Tyra served three purposes. The first being to have it appear on his chest. The second and third purposes will be addressed later on in the explanation. The packet that consisted entirely of the Queen of Spades was switched out immediately the moment Tyra was showing her selection on camera. You can see him squaring the deck up, and he quickly switched it. The producers of the show on purpose didn't show Shin Lim performing the switch. The switch was performed using a savant, which is a bag that hangs behind the table of the performer. The savant contained a total of 3 decks other than the Queen of Spades packet. This signed card was then placed at the center of the deck faced up, and by waving his hand over the deck the card jumped to the top. Shin used a specially designed gimmick for this illusion. This first switch deck was set up such that the first card was the gimmicked flap card, second was the signed Queen of Spades, underneath it was a normal blue bicycle card facing down, and the fourth card was a blank card facing upwards. The rest of the deck consisted entirely of the red color backs. Let's understand the purpose and working of the gimmick flap card. This card, like any other flap card, has a crease right at the center. But this flap card isn't an ordinary flap card. This is because the front end of the card has a paper attached to it. This piece of paper folds on itself when it is pushed down. The crease upon which it folds can also be spotted in this close-up shot. The purpose of this folding paper was to make the Queen of Spades appear as if it was being placed near the center of the deck, when in reality it was actually being placed second from the top, underneath the gimmick. Now comes the second purpose of forcing the Queen of Spades. This flap card, as you can see, is a blue bicycle back. The face of this flap card is actually a queen of spades. To execute the illusion step by step, first, Shin had to press down on the flap over here using his left thumb in this frame. The closed gimmick is actually right on top of the deck because it is the queen of spades that camouflages on top of the signed queen. Now you may have two questions in mind. The first being, where did this folded gimmick go? This is because when we see Shin picking up the signed card, the gimmick cannot be spotted anywhere. The second question is, how was Shin Lim able to reposition the blank card underneath the queen of spades? Let's address the first question. The closed flap gimmick was actually ditched behind the table into the savant. It was right here at this moment when Shin brought the deck near the edge of the table and tilts it slightly back. By doing this, the closed gimmick dropped into the savant. Now let's address the second question of how Shin was able to reposition the blank card below the queen of spades from under the blue back face down card. Shin did a second move at the same time he dropped the close flap gimmick, which was also cut by the producers. This second move can be spotted being performed at the very last second before being cut out. This move is known as a second deal. A second deal is basically when a magician pulls the card second from top. By pulling the second card from the top of the deck, Shin Lim removed the card in between the queen of spades and the blank face-up card and repositioned it underneath the black card near the top section of the deck. The reason for having the card between the queen of spades and the blank face-up card was to make sure the blank card was not flashed at this moment when Shin places the signed queen inside the deck. Now, before we move further into the explanation, I have an offer you won't want to miss out on. If you enjoy these magic reveals and want in-depth understanding of any trick or even entire magic acts, and would like dedicated explanation videos upon your request on this channel, consider joining my $30 tier on Patreon. For those who join my $10 tier, you get to request the explanations for 3 different tricks per month. Consider visiting my Patreon and see which tier suits the best for you. You can also support this channel by liking this video and subscribing. I would really appreciate your support. Now let's get back to the explanation. For the next trick, Shin Lim waved the queen over his chest and vanished it right off the card. To perform this illusion, Shin Lim picked up both the queen of spades and the blank card together, which can be spotted in this frame. You can see his fingers reach inside his shirt to grab a hold of the signed queen. After revealing the blank card and the queen of spades tattoo, he carefully let the queen of spades rest against his chest only to prove that he had nothing in his hands. Shin then reached back into a shirt, grabbed the queen of spades card, and under the cover of his right hand, pushed it into his mouth. After producing the card in his mouth, he placed it back into the deck and by waving his hand turned all the cards red except for the sign the queen of spades. He then squared up the deck, immediately turned the deck blue. Regular viewers of my channel would not have any trouble figuring this trick out. But there is something pretty odd about the moment Shin apparently places the queen into the deck. If you watch this close-up shot, you'll notice the gimmick that was ditched earlier behind the table has apparently reappeared back on the deck. Now, if you were to play this clip of him placing the queen face up into the deck and compare it to the first moment he was seen placing the signed queen into the deck, you'll notice they are both the exact same scene shot from 2 different camera angles. One thing that doesn't match up, which is the blank card that appears in the footage on the right. It appears that this second clip shot from a different camera angle was post-edited with a blank card placed near the edge of the table. This means the blank card never really existed in the original footage. This isn't the first time America's Got Talent producers have been caught post-editing footage of magicians' performances. Captain Disillusion, a popular YouTuber with over 2 million subscribers on YouTube, did a case study on Will Tsai, who performed a coin matrix illusion on America's Got Talent. Captain Disillusion found edited moments throughout Will Tsai's performance. For example, at one instant a coin appeared for 1 frame but was caught not moving along with the shaking table. He also caught the reflection of Will's hand frozen. When the last coin turned into a rose petal, it was seen floating in place, once again, ignoring the motion of the table. Here is what he concluded after studying the footage closely.
Are we really saying that the producers of this competition modify what happens on stage with editing tricks to suit the dramatic needs of the program? Well, yeah, it's all fake. They can do whatever they want. They once made a sideshow magic act look like a world-class impossible illusion, so they certainly don't have a problem freezing some coins on screen to disguise the mechanism that hides and reveals them, if not quick enough for 30 frames per second scrutiny.
The producers of the show would not have any trouble adding the blank card because both the camera and the table are stationary and wouldn't require any tracking. What further doesn't make sense is Shin Lim is pushing the card into a deck that is already face down. Why is Shin then seen flipping the deck face down after the camera cut? What actually happened was Shin Lim placed the signed card faced up in a deck, which was also facing up. After placing the card in the deck, he flipped the deck. The footage then started rolling after he started to flip the deck face down. Shin Lim then performed a color change in which he palms the bottom red card into his right hand and places it on top of the deck. He then spreads the deck but makes sure to not spread the very top section because it contains the blue back, blank face cards. After squaring up the deck, and he turned the red deck to blue. To perform this deck color change, he simply pulled the top card with the fingers of his left hand to the bottom of the deck. He then hands over Tyra her card and asks her to sandwich it in between her hands, picks up the blank card and with a flick of his wrist turns it into the Queen of Spades, magically turning the card in Tyra's hand blank. Shin places both cards on the table and by waving the deck over the surface, he draws a big arrow pointing to the red envelope on the table. This transposition trick is the most easiest one to figure out since most beginner magicians learn this trick when they first get into magic. Shin Lim first performed a top change which looks something like this. During the top change, he placed the Queen of Spades on the deck and handed Tyra the blank card. He then picked the blank card off the table, placed it right on top of the Queen of Spades, and performed a shake change. A shake change which works something like this. After turning the blank card into the signed queen, he performed a second deck switch using the savant, which happens right here. The switch deck contains 12 cards at the bottom that he used to draw the arrow on the table. The top card is a gaff Queen of Spades with a blank back. The rest of the cards in the center are clear plastic cards. This blank back queen was switched for the signed queen. He held the blank back queen as if the signed section of the queen card was underneath this blank card, when in reality the signed queen is currently at the top of the deck. He turned the two cards blank by performing a deck change, which works something like this.
What you're going to do is apply forward pressure with your thumb like this, so that just pops off your middle finger just like that. In slow motion is that the card just does this.
Shin then picked up the envelopes to reveal the signed card had appeared inside it. As of now, we know that the signed card is currently at the top of the deck. The illusion of it appearing inside the envelope was executed with the prepared card and envelope. Now comes the third purpose of forcing the Queen of Spades. If you recall the start of the performance, he forced the Queen of Spades on Tyra. All the Queen of Spades in this spread also contain shim magnets inside them. Shim magnets are designed by Shin Lim himself. They are extremely thin magnets which are able to fit inside a playing card. The magnetic signed card stuck to the backside of this envelope. The moment the card attached to the envelope can be spotted in this close-up shot. The illusion of the card being pulled from inside the envelope, when in fact it was attached on the outer backside, is executed by a concept known as nested envelopes. Nested envelopes apparently look normal, when in reality the backside of the envelope has been cut out of both the outer and inner envelope. This is also the reason why Shin Lim never shows both sides of the envelope. Shin Lim places the card into the deck, turns the entire deck clear, and makes the signed card appear by dribbling the cards. He asked Tyra to push the card into the clear deck, turned it into a solid block, and then completely vanished to thin air after placing it into the card box. This deck, as we know, contains clear plastic cards which were revealed by picking up half of the deck and performing a one-handed fan. By performing a one-handed fan, the top card hid under his right hand palm. He placed the hidden blue card from the top packet underneath the bottom packet. This blue blank card is now underneath the signed Queen of Spades. Shin then dribbled the deck to reveal the queen. He was now holding two cards together and pulled the queen out, leaving the second card behind. His left hand then moved behind the table to perform the third and final deck switch. The clear plastic playing cards were switched for a solid block with a slit at the very center in which Tyra was requested to push the card into. He asked her to place her hand above it and produced smoke from underneath the mat. The surface upon which Shin Lim was performing was prepared with an electronic cigarette device attached to a tube triggered with a switch near his right foot, which can be spotted. When he picked up the card box to place the solid block inside, you will notice that there is a camera cut that happens at this very moment. This camera cut actually hid an important segment in which the solid block was ditched behind the table. Even though the America's Got Talent footage is cut out, he has used this technique of vanishing cards from a card box before, in Shin Lim's first appearance on Penn and Teller Fool Us. The method to ditch the solid block behind the table requires the card box to have its base cut out. In his performance on Fool Us, he can be seen placing the cards inside the box, and after bringing the box near the edge of the table, he vanishes the cards from inside. After having ditched the crystal block behind the table, you may be wondering, what exactly are we seeing here then? Well, this is simply just a second flap inside the card box with lines drawn on it to resemble the solid block. We can spot the second flap as it opens up when the box collapses. If you have made it this far into the video, be sure to hit the like button and also consider subscribing. I would really appreciate the support. Consider checking out my Patreon and subscribing to whichever tier suits you, and as always, have a nice day.